Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and to help you engage with the Texas Legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and today we're giving you, the listeners, the most up-to-date ledge coverage we can, recording just moments after the Texas Legislature adjourned after a lack of a quorum on a very eventful fourth day of the latest special session. This week, the Texas Legislature adjourned the third special session, and almost immediately the governor called them back for a fourth 30-day special session focused on public education, specifically trying to divert public dollars to private schools, and immigration-related bills. Thursday, two House committees met to hear bills, and the Texas Impact team stayed up late to testify and cover the hearings. On the other side of the building, the Senate operated at warp speed, passing 4 bills out of committee with little or no public input and off the floor in just a matter of hours. This morning, Friday morning, the House Select Committee on Educational Opportunity and Enrichment met to approve House Bill 1, the voucher bill, and 2 of the Senate bills concerning border security and funding for a border wall were rushed out of House committees. Here to help us center ourselves in these not unprecedented but unique times is Texas Impact's Executive Director and Advocacy Director, B. Moorhead and Josh Houston. B, Josh, it is good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Thanks, Scott.
I say that, but a couple weeks ago I was talking to Beeman and I said, if I'm talking to y'all this time of year about special sessions, it's probably not great news. But I do appreciate you taking the time to be here. Anyway, so to help us center ourselves, some listeners have been paying attention to every email that we've sent out and others might need a little reminder. Help us wrap up the third session. There wasn't a ton that took place then, but what happened in the third and where are we now?
Well, I'll start by saying there is a significant bill that did pass in the third special session, and listeners could be forgiven at this point for not being able to keep their SBs and HBs and their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s straight. Senate Bill 4 from the third special session is a bill that passed, and Josh, maybe, do you know, has it been signed yet? It will be signed into law. That bill is topically around human smuggling, but what it really does is to create a serious problem for anyone who finds themselves transporting a person who is undocumented in their car. And while it might seem to someone who doesn't have a lot of connection to the issue or the process, there's a lot of reasons that someone might be transporting an undocumented person in their car and not smuggling them or committing a crime. And they are jeopardized right now. And that includes faith communities that help people, either help people who are undocumented or people who are in the process of becoming documented or trying to become documented. And so we're very concerned about Senate Bill 4, and I think we'll see legal challenges to it.
Josh, anything to add on the third special session or where we are beginning the fourth?
Yeah, the way the third ended was in some big fireworks. You had the governor start off the special by saying there's no additional money for public education until he gets his voucher bill. That put the House in a real untenable position, and they openly said that's just not possible. And then they quite publicly called on the governor to add school finance to the call in order for the House to try to broker some sort of deal to move that. By the time that actually happened, there was not really enough time to move a bill in the third, so they knew they were going to have to come back in a fourth. Meanwhile, you had some fireworks over some other immigration bills where the real rub was, so the House passed a very draconian version, but they did it in a way that didn't cost a lot of money. It turns out that was a little bit too tough on the Senate, and the Senate wanted to do it in some different ways that spent a lot of money. And so they finger pointed about whose bill was tougher and punted that one to the fourth as well.
And so now we are in the fourth. Can you remind listeners what is actually on the call for the fourth special session?
Pretty much the same things.
Pretty much the same things.
Yeah.
It keeps getting winnowed narrower and narrower in some ways. It is really vouchers and immigration.
And the Senate, if we're talking about the two different chambers, the Senate's been, as I said in the intro, just warp speed, passing things in a hurry. Can you talk to us where we are in the Senate as of, early Friday afternoon, November 10th?
Yeah, so the Senate passed. So one of the things that's important about vouchers between the House and the Senate is the House combined more money for schools, excuse me, and vouchers into a single bill. The Senate has kept those two things separate, and they've been going through separate committees, right, Josh? I mean,
yeah, and if you go back to the regular session, and this is important, the House has always been in favor of more money for public education, and the Senate has quietly denied that there's a hostage situation occurring, even though there's quite clearly to anybody who's watching a hostage situation occurring. Just see how House Bill 100 in the regular session died over in the Senate because the Senate insisted on attaching a voucher to it.
Right.
So the Senate continues to insist privately that there's no additional money for public education until there's vouchers, denying it publicly, and then the House is in this pickle of trying to deal with that situation.
So yesterday, the Senate passed its voucher bill and also its immigration bill, which it is really appropriate to describe as show me your papers. That is, this is in fact the definition of show me your papers, this bill. The most interesting thing to me, and probably to a lot of people, is going to be that the author of the border security legislation has been for several years Senator Birdwell, who is a very conservative, far-right guy who I think it's fair to say we haven't been very supportive of much of his approach to the border. But yesterday, at the beginning of the fourth special session, he was no longer the author of the immigration bill because he insisted that it needed to comply with the U.S. Constitution.
Heaven forbid.
And the new version of the bill clearly does not. And so there's a new author, Senator Perry. The bill is identical to the House bill by Representative Spiller, which is the same bill they had in the third special session. It is a show me your papers bill, and
with the addition of the fingerprints and the biometric stuff. That,
fair.
That make it tough.
Fair. They made it a little bit tougher by adding
rationale.
Extra cost for local law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And Senator Birdwell got up on the floor of the Senate and spoke against the bill for 5 minutes and said in his remarks, members think carefully. The wrong we are about to commit is to not uphold our oath to protect the U.S. Constitution. So there is some big language going on in the Senate around the issue of immigration. Nevertheless, the Senate passed both of the bills without much to do and, got out in time for dinner. So.
Mm-hmm.
So the Senate is moving quickly. The House, I think to Josh's opening to this conversation, is packaging everything together. I think Representative Hinojosa yesterday, if I'm remembering right, said this is like 40 bills rolled into one. So
yes.
They met yesterday for a very long time. Talk to us about what's going on in the House.
Politically? Let's start with the political because that's really what this has come down to at this point. So what happened yesterday, at least what became apparent to us, is that what's been in the works is that the House leadership has been pushing the Republicans that sit on this new committee that was formed after the regular session and pushing on those Republicans to say, just vote for it in committee. Nobody's going to hold you to it on the floor. Just let it get to the floor so we can have a straight up or down vote of the whole House so that we can go home and put this to bed. There's no way out of this without giving the governor a record vote so that we can all fight about it in the primary. And that is essentially what happened this morning. They had the hearing until about, I don't know, what time did it knock off? About 10 o'clock?
Yeah.
In that ballpark. Hearing knocked off late last night. And they came back first thing this morning, heard a little additional funding bill for the unfunded mandate of the armed person on campus. And then they took up the bill. And it was surprising because if you actually kind of know how people personally think, which we do as lobbyists, it should not have fallen on party lines at all in either direction. But it fell on party line votes and came out of committee where there were there's 4 rural Republicans on that committee that let this thing out. And they are playing a very dangerous game by letting it get to the floor. I remember it was about 20 years ago when, the New Braunfels rep, Castile.
Oh, yeah.
Carter Castile. Yeah, the time to kill the snake is when you have the hoe in your hand, is what she said about it. Back then, she was a big public school advocate in the Republican Party. And they had an opportunity to kill the snake and refused to. And going to the floor with anything is super high risk, especially when there's absolutely no backstop. There is, if it hits the Senate, it's done. There's no constitutional argument at the state or federal levels at this point that can stop it. I mean, they are really, they're going mountain climbing without a rope. By allowing this to happen. Now, the second part of this was, the word was going to be that there was going to be an amendment on the floor. If you let it get to the floor, we'll let you do an amendment where we get our straight up or down vote on whether or not to strip the voucher provision from the bill. And of course, politically, what that would do is if you are successful in stripping the voucher out of House Bill 1, then you're sending an otherwise decent school funding bill over to the Senate. The Senate won't accept it, and then the hostage situation is made clear to the public. Remember me talking about the private and the public explanations of the Senate. The governor gets his record vote and goes to the primary. They all get to go home, was the thinking.
We think that's the
last
thinking.
night. Yeah, I mean, that's what all intelligence tells us that is what's going on. But now that it's out of committee, as of this morning, within hours, the governor calls a press conference. Literally minutes ago, I guess. Minutes
ago, and with the backing of many, many Republicans from the House and Senate.
To which the Governor Abbott said, if they strip the voucher provision from House Bill 1, then he'll veto it and call them all back every single month. Again in December, in January, in February, until they do it. And until ultimately there's a March primary.
Right.
And what we've entered for elected officials is election season. And if they're here, they're not at home in the district doing the things that they do to get reelected in the district. I mean, it was Veterans Day today.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were back home in the district doing Veteran Day things, and they couldn't reach a quorum. And had to come back to, I guess they're going to come back tomorrow.
They're coming back tomorrow, and then also on Monday in some sort of bizarre detention situation.
But this is a good time to remind your elected official, especially to remind your elected state representative, that they're a co-equal branch of government. We have 3 branches of government. The governor can call them back to a special session until he's blue in the face. They don't have to show up.
So
go ahead.
So what's the messaging here? Is it's don't cave, don't give into pressure? If folks are making telephone calls, if they're meeting with their representatives this weekend and early next week, what's the message?
The message is get the voucher out of House Bill 1.
Yeah.
I mean, I think despite the fact that the governor is saying, go ahead and call that bluff, but pull the voucher out of House Bill 1. There is, I think it's not just calls. Scott, you know that I feel this way.
Yep.
It's not just calls, and it's not just visiting if you see somebody at church or in the store. I think there need to be some fairly public demonstrations. I think we are hoping that constituents will go to the district office and hold demonstrations, that they will stand outside the office holding signs and call the media and say, come shine a light on this character. Because right now, nobody is in more power than anybody else in the House. It takes a majority of all of them to pass a bill. So no matter who your legislator is, and no matter whether you feel like it's you and a couple of other people or you and hundreds of other people, you need to get your team together and make some noise, because this is the generational moment.
Yeah, you have 1 week to save public education in Texas.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to ask,
right.
what's the timing? When could they potentially have a vote on the House floor?
Well,
I mean, every day. I mean, they didn't have quorum today, so it is every day is a dicey situation, which is what is just baffling to me about these Republicans that let it out. Because you don't know that you're going to get a guaranteed moment to vote against it at this point.
No, and the another concern that I think if your legislator is on that committee, no matter what party they're in, I think you want to say the idea that we saw a written communication from one of the House leadership saying you shouldn't interpret the vote of the committee to reflect the committee's position.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's how democracy works. The vote of the committee is the thing that reflects the committee's position. It's the only thing that reflects the committee's position.
Yeah, this is the moment. This is whatever the plan they think is that's deep inside our baseball is a little too clever by half. And they're playing this very dangerous game because over the next week, at least, I think it's going to be a week. I mean, right now, the tentative schedule is that the border bills will be on Tuesday, and then sometime, maybe Thursday or Friday, they get to the voucher stuff. That gives the governor a week. And we've already seen how he's responded within hours.
Yeah.
Calling a massive press conference to bully them to say you're coming back again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So you guarantee that the pressure on them is going to be immense. So this is the week. As of Monday, you need to be doing everything you can to mobilize. You need to call. You need to get your friends to call. You've really got to make sure that your community understands that we are in an existential moment for the future of public education in Texas. Because if you get a voucher scheme that diverts money out of the system, you're creating a second system that's parallel and competitive for the limited resources that we already have for funding public education. And there's a proverbial phrase called the camel's nose under the tent. And what it means is if you let that camel get the nose under the tent flap, the camel is just going to come right on in your tent and sleep in your tent. And you're going to be sleeping with a camel in your tent. And that is what's about to happen with vouchers entering the mix in Texas, getting public funding. It's going to suck money out of rural areas and urban areas to create a welfare program for wealthy suburbanites to send their kids to private school.
Or to homeschool their kids.
That's right.
So, yeah, I think a lot of times we make it a point of pride to say, we are not people who say the sky is falling. The faith community has a very long time horizon. We don't say you have 24 hours to save Social Security or whatever the thing is. But we will tell you now, this is the moment on vouchers.
And when you make these communications with your elected officials, do not buy this narrative. Some of them will tell you, but it's going to happen anyway. It's inevitable. The Republicans are going to do it. So we might as well get the best deal we can for public education. First of all, it is not inevitable, given the vote counts that we have. So that's thing number one is that's not true. Thing number two is it's just a bad deal, period. Even if it were true, don't make a bad deal. Because whatever they're not even appropriating enough money to keep up with inflation in this bill over the past few years. So whatever money they appropriate, they can take it away next session. So don't have short-term tunnel vision over. Yes, they are literally choking public schools to death right now by not funding them to keep up with inflation. Yeah, and your local school district is hurting, and also it will be hurt far more long-term and severe if they make a short-sighted decision to go for a little bit of money for a long-term structural damage.
To that point, during the conversation yesterday, one of the representatives asked representatives from the superintendents in public schools, would you take a small voucher program in exchange for more funding? And the answer was a hard no.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Because they understand, the experts understand exactly what this will do.
The other piece that became clear to me more than at any other point during the current voucher upheaval, which I guess has been at least since the regular session, was just how much national, outside the state interests are funding and manipulating the process within the state. So it is not true that the call for vouchers is being driven literally by lots of families, low-income families or families that have special needs or whatever, who are going to their legislators one at a time and building a genuine grassroots groundswell of demand for help getting alternative education. What is true is that several of the people who testified yesterday, under questioning from members of the legislature or in just their own very honest, frank way, said we're part of a national organization. The national organization is committed to undermining public schools, to advancing private religious education. We have a strategy. We have field offices. In one case, they had 11 field offices in Texas, all of them committed to recruiting Texans to advocate for a national position. And I just don't think it's quite clear in the minds of a lot of people, including, again, myself, how much this isn't even a genuine policy debate between Texans. It is a debate. It's not a debate. It is a conflict between Texas voters, Republicans and Democrats, rural and urban and suburban, all different faith traditions and political persuasions, who really, really, really care about their public schools, and people from outside the state who really, really, really want our money.
Yeah, and there's a value question here, right? Which is, do we believe that we need to educate everyone? Or do we believe, I'm just going to put it bluntly, forget your kid, I'm out for mine. That's the issue with vouchers. Is the whole idea of vouchers is, I don't care about your kid. I'm just out to protect mine.
I mean, I thought it was so poignant yesterday when one of the pro-voucher witnesses was testifying about how great it was in their private school that they had small class sizes. And Representative Hinojosa said, but I just have to stop you and ask. I mean, my kid had 30 children in their kindergarten. They would have benefited from a smaller class size too, should they not get it? And of course, it puts me in mind, as it always does, of the Hobby Commission, which did research however many decades ago and concluded the single most important thing the state of Texas could do that would benefit every child, but especially children with special needs and especially low-income families, would be to limit class size, which of course is expensive. It just is. But that's the thing. Everybody, 100 out of 100 experts agree. Yep. That's what every kid needs.
Yep.
Talk to us some, before we close out this episode, about Josh's favorite topic, the primary elections in the great state of Texas. This isn't going to be over after the special session. I expect we'll be talking about these public education votes for the next 5 or 6 months. What role does the primary election have in this special session, and what are we needing to prepare for as we move into primary election season?
Yeah, so we have primary elections, plural, and I mean that because there's kind of no way this thing passes and no way that this thing fails where it's a straight party line vote, in my opinion. Having observed where the fault lines are on this particular issue. That means that we're going to have Democrats who vote for vouchers, and we're going to have Republicans that vote against vouchers. So please take off your partisan hats on this one. That means that this gets settled in both party primaries, where if you have a Democrat that votes for vouchers, that Democrat needs to have a primary opponent that is pro-public schools. And if you have, and in the Republican side, you're guaranteed to have a primary on this regardless. It's just very clear that the apparatuses are moving in such a way, which means, you have to have pro-public education Republicans not only return to office, but hopefully run and challenge people who were pro-voucher and knock them out of office. And so that is what the governor is gearing up to do. He said so in his press conference. He said so multiple times. And everybody knows that in the Republican side. And I think the Democratic side needs to understand that equally as well, even though they continue to not have primaries. So let's then pivot to say, two scenarios. If we somehow get out of the 88th without having vouchers pass, then you have to be prepared to go to the primaries and settle this thing, because that's where it's going to get settled. The next primary season is existential for the future of public education in Texas. Scenario 2 is what happens if vouchers do pass. And we need to at least talk about that, because I think what often happens, especially in Texas, is people go, oh, woe is me, and then they just tune back out and give up, which is exactly the wrong thing to do. If vouchers pass, then again, it is actually doubly important that you then get involved in the primary and knock people out. Do not give up. Do not tune out. Your public schools will need you more than ever, because now they have this big vendor out there trying to decimate the public schools so that they can get more money. Now, I want to give a ray for hope. If vouchers passes, it can be reversed. Illinois just did it. They did it. The news broke today that they are ending their voucher program that they created in 2017. To our knowledge, it's the first time in modern history. Yeah, right?
Fantastic.
The first time in modern history that's happened. Now, note that I'm saying modern history, because in the 19th century that we've all forgotten,
except you, Josh,
38 states did away with subsidizing private religious schools in favor of creating and maintaining a public education system. It's a very long history that you should read up on in The Second Disestablishment by Stephen K. Green. It's probably the best introductory work on that. But 38 states, including Texas, amended their state constitutions to end this practice and to promote a one public system, because it was more efficient and educated everybody.
That's such a great thing.
Now, let's hope we don't have to reverse anything.
No, but that's such good. But
that's my big fear is, yes, it is going to be, it's a generational struggle versus a decade struggle. But we cannot give up hope on educating every child.
Well, that's exactly right. And we also people need to understand the people who are not with you on the issues, they don't give up for sure.
They never do.
Yesterday in the House hearing, we saw former Representative Grusendorf and former Senator Shapiro. Both of them were drivers of pro-voucher movement 20 years ago. And here they were, still at the Capitol, still working behind the scenes to try to get their way. They're not giving up, and you can't give up either.
To be fair, the Catholic Church has wanted vouchers since the 19th century. In the 1840s, you can begin to see the origins of this idea.
Well, I think that's why it's so important that Texans of Faith, that mainline Texans of Faith this weekend really do engage. There are a lot of different forces who are working for vouchers and diverting from our public schools, and teachers are going to be out this weekend. Teachers are going to be working on this, and I think it's really important that the faith community does too, that there are clergy callers who are standing outside of district offices alongside teachers and school administrators and parents and kids and all of the things. So that mainline voice needs to be heard. You've been doing great at that over the course of the last few weeks. We have more than 2,000 people who've signed letters, who've spoken up, who've signed Texas Impact's Public Schools, Public Dollars for Public Schools letter, had hundreds of people make telephone calls this week to their legislators. But as we've said, now's the time. This is the weekend to really get organized, and I'm hoping we can make progress towards getting to 10,000 people who've signed that letter, but not just signed that letter. Made telephone calls, visited legislative offices, and made a public witness outside of district offices this weekend. Now's the time, and I believe we can do that. Josh, anything else you want to add before we close out today?
Y'all are doing so good.
Mm-hmm.
Don't give up now.
Yeah, this is not the time. This is the moment to really go hard for 1 week. Because if we hit 1 week and can get this thing dead, pull the voucher out, and either we pull the voucher out or bottle up the bill, and we get to Thanksgiving, and then the time starts running out on the clock. But this is the critical moment.
This is the critical moment.
This is the critical moment.
All right. Josh, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for all the work you have been doing this week and throughout the year, throughout the decades, but especially this last week up at the Capitol and doing all of the things. Really appreciate you, and I want to give a special shout out again to all of the Texans of Faith who have spoken out for public schools during this legislative session, and especially over the course of last week. Y'all been doing heroic work, but now it's time to find 10 friends to do that work with you. As a reminder, and I just mentioned it, we are still encouraging signatures on Texas Impact's Public Dollars for Public Schools letter. You can find that at texasimpact.org. Our goal is to have 10,000 of those letters signed and hand-delivered to your representatives at the Capitol. So help us out by sharing that letter with your congregations and communities. You can download the letter. You can print out hundreds of copies. You can hand them to everybody that you see this weekend. Get those back to us soon so we can deliver them to the Capitol this coming week. You can find that letter and so much more at texasimpact.org. While you're there, I hope you'll consider joining Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of Faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnett, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.